So again, welcome, Trans 101 training, an annual thing. It's important to make sure that we are updated and have the correct information and kind of know what's going on. So again, my name is Drew Harbo. I'm a registered nurse and a critical care nurse. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the current chapter president of PFLAG Fresno. PFLAG, we're an organization. We are 50 years old as a nationwide. Locally, we are over 30 years old. We work to create a caring, just, and affirming world for LGBTQ people. We support families, educate allies, do advocacy work through our network of supporters. We have, I believe, more than 400 chapters nationwide, tens of thousands of members. Our chapter has been serving Greater Fresno area for more than 30 years. So I'm going to make this go away. So one of my favorite quotes from Brene Brown. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. One of my favorite quotes is, "One day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it'll become someone else's survival guide." And so I always start this presentation by telling you my story. So that adorable little kid you see, that's me, circa 4 years old. Before I was as much trouble as I am now. That actually isn't true. I was just as much trouble then. I knew when I was about 4 years old that I wasn't a girl. I knew that term didn't define me. I didn't have the language. We're talking like early 80s. So there were no books to quote indoctrinate me. There was no teachers to quote indoctrinate me. There was nothing available for me. There was no language that I could use. There was nothing to help me express to my parents and to my adults who I was. That didn't stop me from trying. At this age, I insisted on being called Mike, which is a terrible trans name. Terrible trans name. Drew is so much better. I insisted on being called Mike, and as you can see, I was in my cowboy boot phase, and this was how I looked all the time. I wanted to marry Allie Arner. She was the cutest girl at my elementary school, and I hope that she has had an okay life without me. Bless Allie. And oddly, her brother's name was Drew, and I'd only realized that years later, so I've always kind of wondered, But I knew who I was. I just didn't have any language or any way to share that, right? So I did the best way I could with the information I had, but my life would have been so much better if I had had somebody who could have given me that language and given me that knowledge to be able to express who I was. And that's part of the reason why I do this work, is to help other people to have that language. So this is me, 3rd grade. I was 8 years old. I remember taking this picture. I remember it because I was mad because they let the little boys hold footballs and baseballs, and they made the little girls hold roses. And I was mad because the guide said, "Yeah, we're gonna give you the rose, and you'll be the prettiest little girl in the school." And I'm like, "The heck I will." So they gave me the rose, but it only ended up that they made me into what looks like the most eligible bachelor of Yard Dixon Elementary. I'm ready for my rose ceremony. Look at me, I'm suave as can be. As you can see, I still knew who I was, and I still fought tooth and nail to be able to express myself appropriately in line with who I was. I fought against that daily. If my hair got too long, I would take scissors to it and chop it off. If they tried to put me in girl clothes, I would do as much as I could to destroy them as quickly as possible. I remember in 5th grade, my mom was making me wear girl clothes to school, and I would keep a spare pair in my locker. I still remember that locker combination, 1882. That was 35 years ago. And I still remember that locker combination because that was life-giving for me to be able to access those clothes. By 5th grade, by the time I was 10 years old, this is Artemis, I'm gonna need the tissues. I always cry during this part. I have some somewhere over here. Artemis always supplies me with tissues, bless her. By the time this picture was taken, I had, thank you. By the time this picture was taken, I had been put in conversion therapy by my parents and made 3 suicide attempts. The smile that I see on this kid when I look at this picture of myself, I did everything I could to try to live, to try to survive. Shortly after this picture was taken, I actually moved into a tent in our backyard because I knew that I wouldn't survive on the streets, but so many of us end up on the streets, right? And I knew that I wouldn't survive that way, but I had to try to get away in whatever way I could. And for me, that way was getting out of the house at least. So I lived in a tent in the backyard for years. I don't have a whole lot of memories of the conversion therapy. I have a couple that are basically traumatic flashback memories. The pain and the suffering that I experienced as part of that is something that I'm still to this day dealing with. I have a very good therapist. I highly recommend good, competent mental health care for everybody, and especially for trans folks who have lived through these traumatic experiences of having the people we love and trust most try to make us be into something that we're not. And for the next picture of my story, I'm just going to skip because there are basically not pictures of me for the next 10, 15 years until I transitioned. I did everything I could to escape the camera. Most of the pictures that I have, I've destroyed. I did not want those pictures to exist. So the next picture I really have of me is a solid, that's 27 years. That's another 17 years after that other picture. And I was a good 5 years into my transition. This is my nursing graduation picture. Once I had transitioned, for me, that looked like medical transition. For other trans people, it's going to look different for everybody. For me, once I had gotten to a place where I felt comfortable in my body, I was able to breathe. I was able to breathe and expand my lungs finally. I was able to finally take in what I needed and finally able to live life in ways that were good for me, that felt good, that I did what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do, it turned out, was go to nursing school, which was scandalous, which is funny because I remember that my nursing school was almost all women and me and two guys. And they were horrified because the official picture of me that resides on the Jameson Memorial Hospital School of Nursing, I have an earring in my ear, y'all. It's terrible, right? Horrible. Scandal of scandals. So, if they only knew. It took years for me to start living my life. And once I was able to live that life, I was able to go out and start dating. I was able to meet people and connect with them in a holistic, whole human way. And I met my wife and I met my kids. They were 7 and 9 when I got them. And I'm happily married. I should check with my wife if she's happily married. I think she is. She's still stuck with me. We just celebrated our 15-year anniversary recently. Thank you. So, and my kids are amazing, and they both came out to us as straight, and we told them we love you and accept you anyway. No, that's a joke. That's a joke. We love them regardless of who or what they are. I cannot imagine a world in which I wouldn't love my children. So that's kind of my story. That's kind of where I'm coming from in a very, very brief, condensed manner. So we'll get into the course objectives. I want to help you grasp the basics. This is Trans 101. There are folks out here who could probably skip into grad level trans. Yes. There are folks here that this might be your first introduction. And I'm making this kind of as low level as possible. I did do some changes from this year. There's stuff that's happening that we needed to address. So I want to help you grasp the basics of language, understand what these terms mean. I want to help you understand the experience of being trans. And I want to help you be able to work your way into knowing what to do as an ally, how to be an ally, what further steps there are to take. This is just a 1-hour introduction. So first objective, understand basic definitions relating to the concepts of gender identity and sexual orientation. First, those things are different, right? Gender identity, sexual orientation are different. And I told you this is Trans 101. LGBTQ, this is an acronym. It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, and then the plus is for everybody. There are other acronyms, LGBTQIA, I being intersex, A being asexual. And we kind of think about things, it's an easy way to think about it as being an umbrella. So on one side of the umbrella are sexualities, who you love, lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual. There are a lot of different things we're not going to go into today. And on the other side is genders, gender identity. And that kind of falls under a T for trans. But there are a lot of umbrellas underneath that. I want you to kind of envision a pyramid of umbrellas, because when we're talking about this, we're talking about the messy and beautiful experience of being human, right? And there is no one right way to be human. There is no one way to be any specific gender, right? So we're dealing with the messiness and the beauty of people, right? So think of it as kind of an umbrella. We were talking about trans. Underneath that is gender fluid, gender non-binary, intersex, agender. There are a lot of other umbrellas that fall underneath that. They are all valid. Everybody's going to look a little bit different because we're all human beings, right? And again, we're messy. We don't behave well in terms of fitting in particular categories. So I don't know if y'all remember Vines. They were before Instagram or before TikTok. This is my favorite Vine. We are a bunch of messy umbrellas on the beach chasing down a dude who's trying to spear us, right? Um, we just don't behave into perfect categories. So I want to, if I can impart anything into you as we're starting these definitions, take these umbrellas as being very flexible. Take these umbrellas as being not a full spectrum of the humanity that we see in each other and other human beings, and get past that umbrella and look at the human being who it represents. No more. So definitions. These are very simple. We'll go through them quickly. Transgender, I am transgender. This is an umbrella term, kind of at the top of the umbrellas. It's used as a kind of a catch-all, meaning a person whose gender identity, how I present, who I am, does not correspond with the sex assigned at birth. When I came to the world, the doctor slapped my butt and said it's a girl, and I'm like, no. And I've been telling him no for the past 46 years. Gender non-binary. This is another umbrella term underneath that umbrella term for people who identify outside of or beyond a gender binary. And of course, a binary is you think of it as like you think of it as binary language, 1-0, male, female. That's not encompassing of the beauty and the range of humanity that we see in actuality. So there are people who it doesn't fit for them. That's gender non-binary. There's a lot of umbrellas underneath that. Intersex. Another umbrella term because there are different variations of being intersex. This umbrella term for variation in sex traits or reproductive anatomy, some of which may be visible, such as external genitalia, some of which may be hidden, such as chromosomal variations. There are people who go their whole lives and never know that they are intersex. There are people who go their lives up until they are attempting reproduction, at which point they find out, oh, okay, well, my chromosomes are a little bit different, or this is a little bit different. I'm not going to get into that because there are multiple variations. They show up in different ways. But not everybody who is intersex knows that they are. In the past, and hopefully not in the current, but probably in the current, intersex people who came into the world with genitalia that they labeled ambiguous were given forcible surgery at birth to turn them into one or the other. This is essentially genital mutilation. This is a surgery that these infants cannot consent to and often have lifelong consequences thereof. They have no input into what happens to their body. Hopefully that practice has at least slowed down. Cisgender. So the term trans and the term cis, these are, I believe, Greek prefixes, right? Trans means to cross a divide, to go from one side to the other. Cis means to stay on the same side. Some people say that cisgender is a slur. Well, it's not. It's a technical term to help us define who is trans, who is not, where people are. Cis just means on the same side. You see it in geography, cisalpine, like on the same side of the mountains. You see it in chemistry, which I'm not even going to try to pull a chemistry term for you because that's not my area of wheelhouse. But it just means people whose sex assigned at birth is in line with their gender identity. And I say that roughly because there is variation. So we talk about AFAB or AFAB, assigned female at birth. This is someone who is sort of like me. This is trans men, trans masculine people. F to M, which is a slightly older term. It stood for female to male. We don't always use that now because it kind of makes the assumption that you started life as this and you end it as that. And for me, this has been a journey of who I am continuously in my own self. And non-binary folks are assigned female at birth. The people who have been assigned female at birth, that's how they are, but non-binary. Assigned male at birth, these include trans women, trans feminine people, M to F, which stood for male to female, again, with the you had to pass some sort of test in order to be who you are kind of mentality, and non-binary folks who are assigned male at birth. Gender dysphoria, we're still going through terms. This is deep and painful feelings of distress when your sex assigned at birth does not match your internal understanding of gender, your gender identity. Now, this can be kind of an overarching term or an overarching experience, or it can be this person was being a jerk and they dead named me, and I feel like a horrible human being because they don't respect who I am as a person. Or, you know, my hips feel really wide today and it doesn't work with my body, how I see myself, and I feel distressed because of that. I will get into it in a second, but I want to point out that gender dysphoria is not the end all be all of our experience. We're going to talk about gender euphoria too in a second. And I want to pause on the gender dysphoria because there's more to the story, right? So bonus round, gender identity does not equal gender expression. So your identity is who I am innately inside of myself. My expression is how I express myself, how I express my gender, how I express who I am. I have a friend, he's a trans man. He loves to wear those flowing long hippie skirts. And I just look at him like, and I'll tell you why. You might be thinking, Drew, that's kind of not cool of you. They don't have pockets, y'all. How do people deal with not having pockets? So that's my only concern. But he likes to express himself by wearing the long and flowing skirts, and that is in line with his identity, and it is how he expresses himself, and he looks really, really great in them. So, pockets be damned. So trans and non-binary folk, we might not always present in a way that you feel is congruent with how our gender should be, with our expressed gender identity. But that doesn't mean that we're invalid as trans people. It just means that we're expressing ourselves in a way that may be different or slightly what you would think of as incongruent. For us, it makes perfect sense. We dress in a way that feels good to us. We express ourselves in a way that feels right and whole for us. So this is what we used to believe. You were either a number 1, a Barbie, or a number 12. Again, I have always questioned what the heck is going on with number 7. Because like there's some thick thighs, but there's also like that person's been really doing some deltoid workout. And I'm a little bit concerned. They need to maybe work on some triceps or something. I don't know. But we used to believe that gender was a fixed, finite point. That you were either a Barbie woman, or you were a G.I. Joe man, or you were some discrete number in between. And that doesn't really encompass not only just trans people, but cisgender people. If you have ever decided, you know, I feel like wearing a dress today, and you get femmed up for some event, that's expressing your own gender, even as a cisgender person. If you're a dude and you're going out with the boys and you want to like look all duty and stuff, and you put on your I was gonna say the football person for the Niners, but I actually don't know who it is. So my speech here kind of got interrupted because I don't know football enough to tell you. But if you wanted to go out with the boys and watch football and you wear your jersey and you're, that's a gender expression, even if you're cis. So this is what we used to believe, not encompassing enough for the beauty of the human experience. So we kind of moved along. So this is a graph I pulled from the internet, and it's slightly better. Okay, so there's the binary, there's the male, the female. You see here, there's that spectrum still, but there's like a circle that surrounds it, and people are allowed, quote, to be off of that spectrum in this ideal of it, and even off of the circle completely. But this is not encompassing enough for the beauty of human expression, day-to-day, lived life, all of us and all our messy and beautiful human glory, right? So I found this. This is a more realistic gender spectrum because this allows us to move. This allows us to have freedom within our own expression. It allows us to explore, to evolve. We evolve as human beings, please, please. I hope we evolve. But in our own personal lives, we evolve our own sense of self, and gender is so integral to our sense of self. Whether you're cis, whether you're trans, no matter what, our gender is an integral human part of our experience, right? So this gives us a little bit more freedom and flexibility to understand who we are as human beings, regardless of what gender we are. So Moving on from the basics into some different objective B, ways in which trans, intersex, non-binary people experiences our genders. And I want you to think about this for a second. These are a few things that I have to think about on a fairly regular basis that a lot of cis people never have to think about. Coming out, getting outed before you're ready, especially as we're seeing that trans youth are being used as political football and being used in a lot of the school boards to score kind of political points. This whole forced outing situation that we're looking at you, Clovis. Navigating bathrooms safely. For me, like, I always am amused by the people who say, oh, well, you know, trans people should use the bathroom in the sex in which they're assigned. Yo, I mean, the women's bathrooms have always been cleaner. I would not mind joining you there. Probably y'all don't want me there. But that's the bathrooms that I would be in, the women's bathrooms, if we were put into sex assigned at birth bathrooms, right? Legal hurdles to basic existence. For some folks, there's always a period of time in which our documents don't match, always. It takes time to get documents matched. If my driver's license, if I'm a trans woman, my driver's license has my old masculine name, and I'm pulled over by a cop and I'm presenting in the way that I present, that cop may decide that it's time to harass me. This happens. Unfortunately, this happens. I wish that it did not. But if my documents don't match, I am at risk. And that is something that most cis people don't have to deal with for the most part. There are other legal hurdles to basic existence. I remember I had applied for a job and my social security, I didn't know that there was a gender attached to my social security when I was changing stuff. And so I applied for a job, and thankfully the HR people, they were cool about it. They're like, hey, FYI, this is something that you might need to change. It came back as a mismatch and a fraud alert. So thankfully they were cool about it. They were cool with trans people. It was a hospital and they didn't care. They just cared if I was a good nurse, right? But there are plenty of jobs and people where that would have been an issue and they would have maybe not given me the job. And if I was relying on that for my income to pay for my housing, to pay for my car, then how do I do that? If I had lost that job opportunity, then I lose that economic security. Attaining basic medical care, not to mention transition-related care. I have actually been, even as privileged as I am, being a nurse married to a healthcare provider, being financially secure, being white, masculine, binary presenting, I fell out of medical care this year. I have been without my diabetes meds for about 3 months, up until there's been a new provider who just came into town and got me re-prescribed. If I can fall out of the system, knowing all that I know about the system and how it works and how to advocate for myself, then people who don't have that opportunity and that experience are falling out of it way, way much more than I am. Gender dysphoria, well, we talked about that already. Just having to deal with living in a body that does not feel correct for who you are. That is physically painful. Lack of representation in media. For a long time, there just weren't trans people in media. Now, negative representation in media. If you listen to the media right now, we're all a bunch of rumors and terrible slurs. I wish I had kept a tick mark of all the times I've had to delete comments calling me a rumor or a pedophile on our Instagram. Now, I mean, I work in a job, obviously, I know that that's not true about myself. I hate the dehumanization that puts on our community. But y'all, I've got fingerprints with the FBI. I've been like live scanned. I have to be for my job. I think people are pretty safe with me. But these people who don't know me have decided this narrative about me because of negative media representation. Finding supportive community. It can be hard to find each other and to create community that's supportive. We're all going through a lot of stuff, and to find the folks who are supportive and build that community around you that's going to bolster you through difficult times. This can be actually hard to find. It can be hard to build that. Having laws passed that negate our experiences and existence. There's I think it's over 500 bills this year alone that have been introduced in state legislatures around the country that are aimed at restricting LGBTQ people, mostly trans people and mostly trans youth, because they are the most vulnerable among us. Because they are the most vulnerable among us, they are a very useful political tool, which is a shame because we are talking about human being lives. And having our very humanity be debated in public forums. I don't know if you've ever had your humanity, your self be talked about as, well, you know, they said that I watched this podcast and they said that, you know, trans people aren't valid. And that is physically painful for those of us who this is our lived life and our lived experience. And to have that debate going on and to have both sides of the issue, when one side is not connected to trans people whatsoever, and then the other part is my actual human being life, that is very painful too. So our lives are difficult. We deal with a lot, but it is not all doom and gloom. I had the experience of forming a community that has had my back for years, for people who have stood by me and taken care of me at my lowest points. I have had the experience of getting to know myself and getting to develop myself and understand who I am in a way that is beautiful, and I wish that everybody could experience. I've had some bumpy roads along the way. Everybody has, but these moments of joy and elation of finally being seen for who I am, or being recognized by another, being recognized as another, because as human beings, this is one of the most fundamental things we want as human beings, is to be recognized and seen and held for who we are in ourselves, right? And I've gotten that in large doses as I've transitioned. I remember specifically, I had my top surgery in 2000, May of 2000. And I remember the very air, the first time I put on a t-shirt without having to bind. I remember where I was. I remember the dust motes coming into a shaft of life. I remember this specifically because this was such a pivotal moment for me to have this experience of existing in a body that felt comfortable for me. So we get moments of gender euphoria. We get that. Types of transition. Everybody's transition is going to be different because everybody's life is different. Everybody's humanity is different. We are as unique as the stars. I'm going to cry again. See, we are as human beings, we're as unique as the stars, and each of our experiences is going to be different. That's true for cisgender people. That's true for non-binary people. That's true for agender people. That's true for trans people. For trans people, all of our transitions are going to look a little bit different. What works for me is not going to work for the person next to me, right? And that's true for everybody just living our lives. So when we think about types of transitions, we kind of think of it as we can think of it as three buckets, right? We got the social bucket, the legal bucket, and the medical bucket. And we're going to go through all of those, but each of us has a different amount that needs to go into those buckets for us to feel good in our bodies. Social transition, this is simply presenting in private or in public as our affirmed gender. When we talk about youth, when we talk about kids, especially younger kids who are trans, this is what we're talking about, social transition. Coming out to family, wearing gender-affirming clothing, haircut in line with gender identity. Now, this one's a big one. This one's a big one. Haircuts and getting our first haircut that is in line with our gender. That's where a lot of us are like, we get all verklempt and we start crying because we finally feel seen and we feel like we are presenting as who we are. So there's actually, it's called Strands for Trans. One of our members, Misty, I'm going to call her, hi, Misty, does affirming gender affirming haircuts in line with what we need. Wearing makeup, if that's how you feel that you need to present. Using chosen names, finding pronouns that work for us. These are social transition. There's nothing legal about that. There's nothing that having to do with the medical system. And for some people, this is exactly what they need. This is exactly and only sometimes what is required for them to feel comfortable. And for young youth, prepubertal youth, this is what we see. We'll get to that in a second. Then there's the legal transition. And this is a legal name change. This is our gender marker change. Excuse me. So the legal name change in California is sadly actually easier than it is in other states In other states and other places, you actually have to, once you do your legal name change, you have to publish it. I had to publish it. I had to publish my name with my old name and my current name and risk being outed in that way. California at least doesn't do that, thankfully. It's still $400 to $500, and the paperwork can be quite confusing. Thankfully, if there are folks out there who are interested, the Fresno EOC LGBTQ Center, which we have in the references, they will help you with that. Gender marker change. So same thing. You can do it actually at the same time. It's some paperwork, and I'm not sure anymore if you have to be seen by a judge anymore or not. You don't? Okay, you don't have to be seen. Same paperwork. Yeah, that's good. But it's still a process and it still takes time. And then once you've done the paperwork, California, you have to correct everything from your Save Mart card to your library card to your driver's registration to your social security to your employment records to if you have educational records to, oh my gosh, I can't even, bank records, and trying to get all that. And some of them will only change if you have that one changed. So you gotta get that one changed first, but they require that this one be changed first. So trying to navigate that can be extraordinarily difficult, all the way back to birth certificates. Now, I was born in a state that they will never change my birth certificate. They will never change it. Thankfully, I don't have to use my birth certificate for a whole lot. And if I do, I can show them the legal name change paperwork and be like, but there are plenty of people, especially now that they are enacting laws that target our community, that's getting more and more difficult to do. Medical transition. This is choosing medications and surgeries that align our gender presentation with our gender identity. There's plenty of medications, plenty of surgeries. We can go through just a few quickly. We're looking at hormone replacement therapy. We're looking at different surgeries. We can look at speech therapy, voice training. There's other things, no medical transition. This is just as valid. There are plenty of people who will never be able to access the medical care to obtain medical transition, but their transness is not invalidated because of this. Or there's people who choose not to. There's people who it doesn't have any effect on how they feel about themselves, and that's valid too. When we're looking at medical transition, hormone replacement therapy, we're looking at testosterone for masculinization. So someone like me, assigned female at birth, I take testosterone. There are injection, there's patches, which once you get a little bit furry, those patches are not a good idea. Once you start going into body hair, highly not recommended the patches. There is a depot pellet. Unfortunately, if I understand, it only comes in 1 or 2 different dosages, and so it's not as useful as one would hope for our community. And the topical gel, which is great. It's like rubbing Purell all over your side. It's wonderful. For feminizing, there's estrogen, progesterones, and anti-androgens. Anti-androgens is just blockers for the testosterone. These are feminizing. This is for people assigned male. There's injectables, there's patch, there's pills. It kind of depends on what route you're going within that. For the vast majority of trans people, this should be primary care. Every medication that's used in medical transition for trans people has been used in cisgender people for decades, including puberty blockers. An endocrinologist level of care is not necessary for the vast majority of people. For some people with complicated cases, they may need that. Primary care providers provide these medicines for cisgender people every day of the week. They should be able to provide it for trans people too. Many of them won't. Many of them simply won't. I can't tell you the number of providers I've gone to asking for basic medical care who have flat refused to care for me as a trans person. And I actually, this t-shirt I gave my wife, it's not rocket surgery. So gender affirming surgeries, we'll go through this briefly. People get hung up on the surgeries a lot. I want to encourage you, they're not really your business to ask people about. If you would not like to be asked about surgeries on your intimate areas, please consider that as you're interacting and interfacing with trans people. My business is my business, right? So I'm not going to go through very much of this. Top surgeries are masculinization, such as mastectomies, for breast augmentation for trans women assigned male at birth. Bottom surgeries This is construction of a neophallus, construction of a new penis, or construction of a vagina. There's hysterectomies, vaginectomies, and orchiectomies. And orchiectomies is the removal of the testes. And there's varying degrees of this. There's varying ways we can go about this and varying time scales we can look at these on. There is facial feminization or masculinization surgeries. There is body feminization or masculinization surgeries. This has to do with fat shifting. And I want to point out, gender affirming care is not just for trans people. Cisgender women have been getting breast augmentation for years. Cisgender men have been getting doll implants and such for years. That is gender affirming care. It's just, since it's not done on the trans population, that's okay somehow, and mine is not. And then again, for folks who elect not to have or cannot access surgeries, gender affirming surgeries, they are valid as trans people and valid in their own identities just the same. So what about kids? We're hearing a lot about kids these days, right? What about kids? What about them? Children are just as involved in developing their evolving identity and sense of self as adults are. And I have down here, you can't see it, but it said maybe even more so. From what I understand, most youth are beginning to solidify their gender identity. By the time I showed you that first picture of myself, by 4 or 5 years old, people have in mind their gender. What we don't have is the language to express that. What we don't have is the theory to, talk to our kindergarten teacher and explain to them why we feel the way we do, right? That doesn't make it less valid. When I told my parents that I wasn't a girl, when I dressed the way that I dressed and refused to wear dresses the way I refused to wear dresses, when I cut my own hair every time mom would let it get a little bit long, that was me expressing my gender identity. Now, I presented in what would be construed as a typical fashion, right? We're seeing a lot now, well, what about these people who didn't look like that when they were 4 years old? They are valid too. So many of us understand that we will not be accepted, that we will be rejected by the people we love most if we don't conform to the ideals which are put on us. So many of us trans people try so hard to butch it up or to femme it up so that we fit in. And their presentation might not look as, quote, typical as mine. That doesn't mean that they are not telling you the truth about who they are, right? I want you to listen to people. When they tell you who they are, listen to people. We are each our own expert in who we are, right? And the cartoon is adorable. I can't resist a good dad joke. Trans youth are not a political football. So we're seeing a lot right now as it relates to trans youth. They are an extraordinarily vulnerable population. They're a population about which people haven't spoken a lot in years. And so there's a lot of misinformation, and that can be exploited by people who have unfortunate aims and desires. Our kids, our trans youth, are not a political football. They are human beings and should be treated as such. We see very definitely over and over again in the studies and in the surveys that when trans youth are treated as they present, when they are respected in their selves, that they do better. They have easier lives. They exist easier. When we treat people softly, they exist easier in the world, right? Reduces depression symptoms, reduces thoughts of suicide, reduces the suicidal attempts, reduces anxiety, improves school attendance, improves when trans youth are using their able to use their chosen name at school, at work, with friends, their school attendance is improved, their school performance is improved, their ability to access their needed basic goals of life, that's improved. Their relationships with their parents are improved when they are respected as human beings. They are not a political football to be kicked around. Protect trans kids. Listen to kids when they tell you who they are, when they explore who they are. Now, we are given the opportunity in life to explore and develop who we are over time, right? Some of these kids are going to explore and they're going to find ways to exist in the body that they are given. Some of these kids are going to explore and they are going to find ways to make their body a hospitable home for their soul, right? Listen to them. It doesn't cost you anything to call them by the name that they are asking you to call them by. It doesn't cost you anything to use the pronouns that they are asking you to use, even if these change over time. That doesn't cost you anything. It could save this kid's life. And I put this picture up because of the next slide. I found this picture on Google and I put it up because of the next slide, because it reminded me of somebody, right? It reminds me of me. I essentially socially transitioned when I was 4, back in the early 80s. And no, I wasn't indoctrinated. Heather Has 2 Mommies wasn't even out yet, much less any books about being trans, right? But for prepubertal youth, that's what it looks like: coming out to family, wearing gender affirming clothing, haircut, haircut in line with gender identity, choosing a name that feels right for us. And by the way, we often go through multiple names. I will admit to you freely that I tried the name Indiana on because I had a cool hat at one point. It did not fit, it did not work. But the Indiana Jones hat, yeah. So we often have to try a few names to find the one that works for us. It can be a pain. It can be a pain, especially if we are getting ready to do our paperwork and it's getting time to do driver's licenses and stuff. And we don't want to do it 7 times, right? So it's good to find that out before you start filing paperwork and name. Give it a try. You know, make sure that that your kids that it works for them, and that's okay. That we have that exploration. This exploration is part of our being human. And using pronouns that feel right, same thing. It might take a little bit to figure out what works for us, but it doesn't cost anything, right? Now, as we're talking about puberty blockers, now I mentioned a few slides ago, there are no medicines that are being used in transition for trans folk that haven't been used in cisgender people for years. Puberty blockers have been around and being prescribed to cisgender kids who are going through precocious puberty, too early puberty, since the early 80s. These kids are adults and have had kids and moved on with their lives, and they have been fine. These medications are fully reversible. For transgender diverse youth, puberty is a painful and irreversible process. It can be paused. We can pause the changes, the hair growth, the facial hair growth, the secondary sex characteristics, breast growth, testicle growth. We can pause that and give the kids and their parents time to work together and figure out, okay, what route are we going? What feels good for you? What do you need to live a fulfilled and happy life? When the medication is stopped, and there's very specific actually guidelines around this. There's standards of care that have been in place for years and years and years and years, and are accepted by all the major medical organizations. And when the medication is stopped, when they hit a certain stage of puberty, or where they would be in puberty, or when they have decided with their parents' help what's going on, then they either are able to start hormone replacement therapy, like me, starting testosterone, or they've stopped the puberty blockers, and the secondary sex characteristics of the sex assigned at birth will kick back in and resume pretty much. So this is a life-saving medication for you. This is a life-saving medication for you. Unfortunately, this is being restricted in many states. Access to this is being decided by politicians instead of the parents and the youth and their medical provider. And that is a travesty. Trans rights are human rights. Objective C, I want to help you learn how to be a trans ally. So, step 1, you're already doing it by coming here today to learn. And that is the big thing that if I can put that over here for a second. If I can do one thing, it's to encourage you to continue to learn. We'll have resources at the end of this, and I encourage you to use those resources. I encourage you to further engage your education, your critical thinking, further engage with the trans community, and further continue to learn. There's a lot more. This is a 1-hour talk. We are not going through everything. There's a lot to learn, but here's the cool thing. Step 2, you don't need to know it all to respect. you don't need to have a degree in gender studies to be able to treat me as a human being, right? You don't need to know my entire history to treat me with the respect and the dignity and the worth of a human being or any other trans person. There are ways that if you need to know something, there are ways of respectfully asking, and there's ways of respectfully backing off when you realize that you've stepped too far. And unfortunately, we're not going to get into that today because it's a 1-hour talk, and there's been so much this past year that's happened that I have to pivot and I have to move into step 3, how to speak up and stand out against misinformation, inflammatory rhetoric, false narratives, because there's so much proliferating about our communities, so much misinformation and intentional disinformation, I will say. There's so much inflammatory rhetoric going on about our community, about the human beings that make up my community, and false narratives that are being told about us. And we need our allies to step up and be able to do the work of speaking and helping us to combat that. So I want to go through a couple of things, and some of these you're going to be like, yeah, duh. And some of these you're going to be like, oh, yeah, okay. But I want to talk to the kind of lowest common denominator here and make sure that we know how to address and find reliable sources of accurate information. So if we're looking for reliable resources or we're looking for accurate information about trans people, the first place you should turn to is trans people. And there are plenty of us who are speaking about our lived experiences. There are plenty of us who are doing the work to educate. There are plenty of us who are speaking out and have various organizations that we speak for or that we do these presentations for, or that we just teach our neighbors. I have neighbors who didn't know anything about being trans. And now my neighbor, she was so excited when she hired a non-binary person. She's like, I'm making sure that everybody uses the correct they, them pronouns in the office. And I'm like, thank you. And this is just because she's had back and forth conversations with me and understands that this is who I am as a human being. This is who this person is as a non-binary human being. So we are the source material. Trans people are. We speak about our lived experiences, and I urge you, listen to us when we speak about our lived experiences. Actual family members of trans people who are doing the allyship work, the people who are supporting their loved ones, who are in the trenches with us day in, day out. I can't tell you the number of parents I talk to who are so afraid for their youth. And have to physically stand guard over their youth. And these are some of the fiercest and most beautiful people. I'm going to cry again. Beautiful people I know, because they are mama bears and papa bears, and they are doing the work to care for their youth and to make sure that their youth have as safe and as affirming an environment as possible. These people need to be protected as well. They are doing the actual work. They have skin in the game. And they are able to give you accurate and reliable information about the human beings that are in our trans community. Mainstream medical and mental health associations, publications, all of the major 30 plus some odd major medical organizations, associations, everything from the American Medical Association, American Nurses Association, American Psychiatrists Association, American Psychologist Association, the California LMFT Association. All of the major ones have supportive statements, statements in support of gender affirming care for trans people, including trans youth. There are a couple of breakaway organizations. Generally speaking, they are also, when they are, the ones that I know about also advocate for some other odd things that are not in line with mainstream medical knowledge. So do be aware. And scholarly books with citations, with peer-reviewed published articles. So that's important. Peer-reviewed published articles, scholarly book with citations. Anybody can write a book, right? I could write a book right now that says the sky is green, and I could get that published. Anyone can write a book. Watch for books from the trans community, from trans people, trans family members, from educators who work with us, from people who have been working with us for years, from people who have either skin in the game or scholarly credentials, and preferably also skin in the game at that point. Look for citations, look for peer-reviewed articles. So what I want you to do is look for people who know what it's like to be trans or to have a trans loved one, who know the challenges, who know what we face and what we need for our community. Here's what I want you to not look for. I want you to learn to identify harmful and politically motivated sources of misinformation and intentional, unfortunately, disinformation. One of those is if a book or article has words like madness, craze, cult, fad in the title, this is thinly veiled and sometimes extremely thinly veiled anti-trans propaganda. Now, each of these terms I pulled from actual best-selling books that are available right now for you to buy that talks about how we are all deluded and that we are not really trans. The trans doesn't really exist, but I'm pretty sure that I exist. I don't know. I'm pretty sure. I poked myself and I'm still here. So these are actual titles in the actual titles of some of these books. These are not sources that are going to give you accurate representation of the beautiful human beings of our community. If an informational film is supposedly award-winning, check that award. There's a film that's going to be playing in an outlying community in the very near future. I'm not going to advertise for them, but it's supposedly an award-winning film debunking the trans, I guess, something like that. So I kind of looked into it. This award-winning film, it looks like the awards were created just for this film. I also give myself awards. I brushed my teeth this morning award. I was so proud of myself. Watch for that. Also be aware, unfortunately, there are bad actors. There are several of these films that reach out to trans people and to trans family members and approach them and say, will you be in my film? I want to tell the story of trans people. And then they twist their words. There are several people who have had this happen to them. If you are approached by people to tell your story, check into them, look into their credentials, come and check in with us, and we have connections where we can look into the back end and see who these people are and make sure that your words are not going to be twisted and turned against the people that you love most and are trying to support. Ask yourself, does this particular source that I'm reading, do they stand to gain from manufactured anti-trans outrage? Are they a social media influencer whose only job is to keep you clicking and to keep you watching? Do they make money off of your continued support? Are they a politician who is trying to get your votes, and the easiest way to get votes is to foment outrage, to have a one thing that everybody can be galvanized and stand against? And right now, unfortunately, that one thing is me and my community that people are being galvanized to stand against. Ask yourself when you're looking at sources, is this source likely to be a part of that? Are they benefiting in some way personally from dehumanization of trans people? And lastly here, myself that way. Be wary of sources who are connected to or given large platforms by extremist political groups, such as the Proud Boys. Unfortunately, I can name you at least 4 people right now who have been given a large platform by the Proud Boys to speak anti-trans rhetoric. Actually, there's one that we keep getting tagged in their Instagram account for them to be aware that we're doing trans work so they can galvanize and organize against us, against PFLAG Fresno. I keep removing those tags because I don't want them to bother me. I've got stuff to do, right? I've got to go grocery shopping after this. I don't have time to fight gays against groomers. But be wary of your sources. Find sources that are connected to and have skin in the game with trans people, preferably more than one. So allyship for trans families. So family support of trans people, even if it's just one person, reduces the risk for suicide, improves the rates for anxiety and depression. It makes life better for us. Even to have one person, I believe the statistic is one person can reduce the risk of suicides for trans youth by 40%. as of the Trevor study. You have plenty of people who are trans families. Ask them how you can support them. Ask how you can support them and their families. They may ask you, you know, I've got this school board meeting coming up. They really need to hear from people who want my child to be treated fairly in school and not be outed or not be treated differently from their peers. Can you write a letter to the school board? They may say, can you show up with me to the school board meeting? They may say, can you, I have to, my child gets their care at Planned Parenthood. Can you walk with me into Planned Parenthood to access healthcare with my child? They, because Planned Parenthood does gender affirming care as well, as also cancer screenings if you need that. Ask how you can support the people and the families in your life. And if you are a family who is supporting your own trans member, allow people to help you. Allow people to step in and help protect your child. So I have this quote from one of the postdoc researchers at Palo Alto University. They study the rates of anxiety and depression in trans youth when they do get support and when they don't. And I love their quote. Certainly, there have been studies about trans youth having depression or suicidal ideation. As a result, some people think that being trans makes someone more likely to suffer from mental health risks. But really, what we see is that it's not about being trans, but whether you're supported or not. Being trans does not innately put you at risk for anxiety, depression, mental wellness difficulties. The societal stress of trying to exist when people don't want you to exist, that is where the anxiety to the depression comes in. And support for trans kids is vital. These kids, again, if they are supported, if they are cared for, if they are treated as human beings, if they are treated with respect and dignity and worth that all human beings are worthy of, then their mental health outcomes are raised to the level of their peers. Their anxiety levels decrease, their depression levels decrease, they do better in school, and they come up to the same level as their cisgender peers. So support for these youth is vital. It is life-giving, it is life-saving. And for my last slide, I want you to ask yourself this: is it my loving intention to support people as they discover, evolve, express their most truest and beautiful human self? And then the next question I want you to think about is, and what am I doing and what I'm reading, are the sources I'm taking in, are they love-based or are they fear-based? And that's a huge thing that we can easily discern. Is it love-based? Is this in support of the human beings that are a part of this community? Myself, my PFLAG members, our community members. Is it in support and love for us? Or is it fear-based, out of misinformation, disinformation, out of politically motivated or personally motivated animosity or purposes? Am I acting out of love or out of fear? And that, I think that can probably be applied to our lives and as a whole too. So I have some resources. I have a web page in the next slide. We'll open it up to questions here in a second. And I want to thank you all for coming out. For the questions, when you give me a question, I'm going to repeat it back just to make sure that the folks who are in here are able to hear. And we'll open it up for questions.